Kia ora whanau, welcome to part 2 of Stuff You Should Know with Paul and Henry. It's good to have you back. Welcome, Henry.
Thanks, Paul.
No worries at all, mate.
Are we still the Paul Henry Show?
If we want to be the Paul Henry Show, I'm
back.
cool with that.
Yeah.
Hey, today we're going to talk about making good decisions in a regulatory context. Last time we talked about natural justice. I think that's a really good platform or segue into this conversation because it forms a big part of it. So we're going to take you through that stuff. At the end of this, there will be an email on the screen. So if you've got any questions or feedback, please send that through to us and we'll endeavour to get back to you. So good decision making, Henry.
Good decision making. I think we could get quite vague. It's a big topic, good decision making. But if I think about good decision making in our context of being a regulator, I like to go back to what does it mean to be a regulator? What does it mean to regulate? Why are we here? And really, it's about influencing behaviour. Influencing behaviour and outcomes to get to the good standard. So part of what we do, a lot of what we do is setting that good standard. What does good look like? And then the really important work is getting people to that standard. Now, most people want to comply and they want to do the good thing and they will respond well to encouragement and education. But some people, whether they've got the right intentions or not, will fail to meet that standard. And really, good regulation is about moving those people who can to that good standard and getting rid of the ones who can't make that standard, right? So really, good regulatory decision-making is measured by our results, our ability to actually change people's behaviours and get more people onto the good standard and the right outcomes.
Cool. So I guess if we think about this at that high level, as regulators, we make decisions all the time around some pretty big things, around policy. When people are setting the standards, we make decisions around what the standards should or shouldn't be. And then I think what you're really talking about there is the carrots and sticks end of this end of the spectrum. And I think it'd be good today if we focus the conversation on, the types of decisions people will have to make in frontline roles. And when I say frontline, I don't necessarily mean in the field. That might be in the call centre or, working in another office job, but you're dealing with the public and you have to make calls around things. So
and they can be tricky. They can be really hard.
Yeah. What happens if you get it wrong?
Well, I think getting it wrong means bad things happen.
Yeah, we've got a good example of that.
Unsafe outcomes.
With Dargaville Diesel, haven't we? Where, we visited, as far as I can recall, Dargaville Diesel many times and every time made the decision to issue a warning rather than taking any other action, and that subsequently resulted in a fatality. The reviews of Waka Kotahi and regulatory failure, which
so actually
we don't need to talk about anymore.
No, but actually I might just use that to talk about. So one of the things in Te Waki Te Maia is that we are informed by evidence and intelligence. And I think the Dargaville Diesel example also shows that to be able to see a pattern of behaviour, you have to have the information in front of you and at hand to know, is it time to escalate because is there a pattern of behaviour? So I think that's probably one of the key pillars of good decision making is having good information and being evidence-led and intelligence-led.
Evidence-based.
Yeah,
we talked last time about letting the evidence speak for itself, didn't we? And that's really what this is about. Hey, look, there's a few things for me that I'd like to tick off and keen to hear your thoughts on these around what makes a decision a good decision. And the first one for me, and you'll probably have an interest in this one, Henry, is it's got to be lawful.
It has to be lawful. Yes, it has to be lawful. Where these are things that if it weren't for the legislation, weren't for the regulation, these things would be legal. You could just go out and do them. The state has come in and imposed itself and said, no, if you want to do these things, you got to get all of these licenses, pay all this money, deal with our staff. We have to act within the law because we are, fundamentally we are infringing on people's freedoms. For good reason, but that's what we're doing, and it has to be lawful.
We're exercising the power of the state, aren't we?
We are,
and we can't step outside of that.
No.
So I guess the practical thing there is, if you're going to make a decision, make sure you've got the delegation, the warrant, the authority to make that call. And also know when it's time to bump it up the line. Or push it down. The next thing on my list is your decisions have to be timely. And I can't really think of an example of that, but I think the probably the logical one that stands out is if you delay in your decision making where there's a safety issue.
Yes.
And I understand you've got some thoughts around that, where immediate suspension, for example.
Yeah. So, I mean, when people talk about their frustrations with government, usually it's about how long things take. Even if it's simply being on hold to IRD for 20 minutes, about how long things take. And I think about WorkSafe has come under a bit of criticism for how long they go between informing the victims about where their investigation's at. Yeah. So some things take a lot of time, and you need to be careful. But one aspect of timeliness is just keeping people informed. And then the other aspect of timeliness is if there is an immediate safety issue that needs dealing with, deal with it immediately. And last week we talked a lot about natural justice, which essentially does slow you down. But we have some powerful tools in the agency to deal with immediate safety threats. We can do immediate suspensions. The railways team have something called a Section 28 notice. So there are occasions where the law recognises we need to act really assertively, really quickly, then sit down and have the conversation and do the natural justice thing. So sometimes we have to be fast, and sometimes we have to be considered, but be mindful that people are waiting for our decisions.
I think just on that, it's the advice I got many years ago when I was doing this stuff, as a frontline person, was make a decision for the right reasons with the information that you've got. And if it turns out that's not the right decision, you can always make another one.
Yeah.
So you're better off to go, hey, stop. And then if you get some more information, go, okay, you can carry on now, rather than go, you better carry on because I'm not sure, and then something bad happens.
Yeah, that's right. I remember actually working here, we put a permanent condition on someone's license.
Yeah.
And they freaked out at that idea of permanent condition and went, oh my God, that's it. It's game over. I can never get this thing back. And we said, oh, no. When we say permanent, it means it's there until we take it off. But we're always open-minded to take it off.
Yeah.
We're always open-minded to take it off. And we do, right? As a regulator, we need to stay open-minded.
Yeah.
And if the facts change and the world changes, well, our decisions will change as well. So you got to make the right decision with the facts that are in front of you.
Yep.
But then be open-minded that if the facts change, your decision might have to change.
You've got to make another decision.
Yeah.
And that's important too, that you don't just stick to your knitting or be stubborn.
Yeah.
As a regulator, you've got to be open-minded, like you say. Look, so that's lawful. It's got to be timely. The next thing on my list is it's got to be fair.
Yeah.
And you've made some comments. That's about process and proportionality.
Yeah.
Big legal word. The process, we talked about that last week.
Yes.
We talked about natural justice, didn't we? I don't think we need to cover that off here.
No.
The only comment I'll make around that is often in decision making, people look at regulators and want consistency. And what is more important is consistency of process, which doesn't always mean consistency of outcome, because each case can have so many different variables that on the face of it, they look the same. This guy operated illegally, and how come you didn't prosecute him, but you're prosecuting me? Well, there might be a whole lot of nuances in each case that you need to unpick.
Yeah.
So consistency of process is key. Do you want to talk about proportionality?
Yeah. So proportionality is really, it goes to one of the important concepts in Te Waka Tumaia, which is right tools, right time, right impact.
Yeah.
And it's the idea that, if a threat's this big, you respond with something this big, not, huge. And
you
not
use
too
the saying,
small.
you don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
You don't. Yeah. So there's this cliche: you don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And the example I'm familiar with overseas is the civil aviation regulator in America. Basically was accused of under-regulating, so they became quite nervous. There was an issue with a bunch of aeroplanes that, have very prescriptive rules about what should be on an aeroplane, and they discovered that there was a piece of electrical tape taping a wire to a piece of metal that hadn't been applied in accordance with the standard. And they grounded the whole fleet until they went through every plane and redid the electrical tape. And that's just not a fair outcome for anyone because it's not proportionate to the risk.
That's a really good segue to the next thing on my list, mate. So lawful, timely, fair, it's got to be in the public interest. Now, that often, I understand, gets confused with what the media think is important.
Yeah.
So it's not how much the public is interested. Another way of thinking about public interest is it's got to be in the public good. So it's got to be for the general welfare of the public at large. A really good example of that, I like to talk about public interest, is tourism. So New Zealand has, pre-COVID, had a very, very vested interest in having a healthy tourism sector. And so it was in the public interest that was regulated to quite a high standard. Yeah. Because if it's not, tourists won't come here. So it was in the public interest sometimes for regulators to take some pretty hard action and regulate tourist operators quite tightly. And we've seen now with COVID the impact of not having that tourism creates a massive economic impact. Yeah. So it was in the public interest that we had a healthy tourism sector. And in your example, it's kind of, is it in the public interest to ground an entire fleet of planes and disrupt the air travel network significantly, probably with huge expense, to some people? Yeah. You know?
Yes. And I think for me, going back to Tuaki Mai, we are risk-based and focused on harm prevention. Yeah. So that's why we are here. And in that example, you go, well, why does that rule exist? What is the actual safety risk from that non-compliance? And okay, so we have regulated that there's one way to deal with that safety risk, and they're not complying with that. But what are they doing about the safety risk? Maybe they're doing something that's pretty effective anyway. So what's the right response? And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is why are we here? Yep. We are here for the public interest. We're focused on harm prevention, and our decision making should be based around that.
Based around that stuff, So lawful, timely, fair, in the public interest, and what you're talking about now, mate, is it's got to have the right impact.
Yep.
And that's that big question about what are we actually trying to achieve here, you know? Do we want to hold someone to account? Do we want to change the behaviour of a sector? Do we want to stop some harm from occurring? Do we want to deter other people?
Yeah.
Or all of those things, you know? That's all the stuff you really got to weigh up when you're making those decisions, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people talk about the attitude test. You know, does the operator pass the attitude test? And I think it is. I think it's okay.
No, well,
when used in the right context, which is it's that willingness to comply, right?
Yeah,
if you've got an operator who is willing to comply, they have a good attitude. You know, the starting point of how we react might be different.
Yeah, I think the really important point there, mate. The reason I was disagreeing is it's their attitude to safety and their attitude to compliance, not their attitude to the regulator.
That's right. They might be pretty grumpy.
They could be grumpy. They could be difficult people to deal with, but actually their attitude to safety is good. That's the important part.
Yeah, they might be pretty grumpy that they've had their day disrupted by some Waka Kotahi polo shirt on their or
they're actively campaigning against Waka Kotahi, but running a safe business. You know?
Yeah, that's right. But I think the first lens is, you know, is there a risk of harm?
Yeah.
You know, is there an immediate safety risk? What's the safety risk? And then the second important lens is, what is their willingness to comply? And that helps you pick the right tool, which people respond well to education and encouragement, and which people actually need to be held to account and need to be really strongly incentivized to comply.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So finding that right tool. So we've been working away on this thing here. I've only got the black and white vision. It's called the Regulatory Compliance Framework, Right Tools, Right Time, Right Impact. It sets out a whole bunch of stuff around decision making and sets the scene. A lot of it's the kind of stuff we're talking about today. And that sets out 5 things that we should weigh up when we do make a decision. The first of those is the conduct. So what's actually happened? Mm-hmm. Is it minor and one-off? Or is it really serious? You know, someone being killed or multiple people being killed. What's the risk of harm? Again, is it there's actually no real risk, a bit like the tape example in the aeroplanes. There was no real risk, through to, you know, is this a widespread risk, a widespread harm that's endemic across all of the sector that you need to address?
Yep.
The third one is, what is that attitude to compliance? Are they people, if we sit down and have a chat, they'll go, yep, fair enough, I need to pull my socks up?
Yep.
Or do we need to give them a little bit more of encouragement with some harder edge tools? The next one is the public interest, and we've talked about that. So not how interested is the public, but is it in the interest in the public at large? And the last one we've got on the list, which I think we could run a whole series of, is the Te Ao Māori principles and whether or not it's aligned with Te Aki Te Maia.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah. And I've made a little note here in my notebook. Ironically, it's in my notebook. When you make a decision, record it. Like, record why you've made, if you're going to weigh up those things, write down that you've thought about this stuff. Write down why you made that call. And the reason you do that, at a real practical level, if you're having to make a decision, and particularly if you're having to make it in a hurry, and later on someone's second guessing you about what you did, and that might happen months later when we're being sued, you can turn around and say, look, these are the things that I thought about. Anyone would look at that and go, that sounds fair, that sounds reasonable, it's lawful. It mightn't have been the right decision now that we know everything we know, but you're still okay.
Yeah,
you know?
And writing stuff down also hopefully forces you to pause and think about am I being open-minded? Am I looking at both sides of a ledger here? And going through your frameworks and your headings, you could use those headings or whatever other templates you're working with. And it's a good, self-audit tool for your own decision making.
And I think that a trap that sometimes regulators fall into is when they make a tough decision, they do a really good job of recording it because it's a tough decision. Or they make a contentious decision, they do a really good. But when they decide to do nothing, they often don't make a good record of why they decided to do nothing. But actually, they're the ones you really need to be recording as well, because it's when you do nothing, you'll get the most public criticism. Something went wrong, you guys knew about it, you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to say, well, we didn't for these reasons.
Yeah, and I think that's something that a really mature regulator can do is look at someone, find that there are some things which are non-compliant.
Yeah.
Take a light-handed approach, walk away, something bad then happens, so that some harm occurs.
Yep.
And a really mature regulator could stand back and go, we actually think we made the right decision. Despite the fact that harm occurred subsequently, in that moment, we stand by our decision making because it was proportionate, it was lawful, it was timely, all of these things, because we can never eradicate risk.
Yeah, that's right. And you could not necessarily foresee that harm occurring.
That's right. Yeah. And so, and we're evidence-based, and we know that there wasn't a pattern of non-compliance. It was a one-off at that point. So that's something to bear in mind too. We're dealing with risk and inherent uncertainties. Bad things can happen, and we've still made a good decision.
Yep.
It's hard, as I say, you have to be quite mature to take that stance. It's a hard spot to be in, but that's the nature of what we do.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, I talked about the aligning our decision-making with the principles of Te Aki Te Maia and Te Ao Māori principles. I'm no expert in that stuff. I suspect you're probably not either. We're all on the journey with our learning there. I think one of these sessions we need to get someone along who is, and have a good talk through about what that really means as well, to see the world through that lens and to think that way.
Good idea.
Yeah. So please, any questions at all you like, we'll put the email. Have you got anything else, mate?
No, that was everything I had to say.
Yeah, I think
good
we've covered
structure,
it.
Paul.
No questions from the audience? No. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Ka kite anō.